On the behalf of our principal and our HOD, Dr. Lad Madam, I welcome Dr. Supriya Balerao Madam for this lecture of ethics. Dr. Supriya Balerao is well-known person in research field in Ayurveda faculty. She is MD and PhD Ayurveda and MA Sanskrit. She has done PG diploma in bioethics and she has taken special trainings in biostatistics, including systematic reviews and meta-analysis techniques in molecular biology, pharmacogenomics, and clinical research. Currently, she is working as scientist in IRSHA, Interrelative Research School of Health Affairs, at Bharati Vidyapeeth, Deemed University, Pune. She has very vast experience in the field of Ayurvedic concepts and procedures in metabolic diseases and various types of research activities in Ayurveda. She has delivered more than 200 lectures in research methodology, biostatistics, scientific writing, and ethics across the country. She is chairperson of 3 ethics committee, and she has published 35 articles and 3 book chapters. So today, on the occasion of Bioethics Day, she has told me that but university as MUHS last year MUHS letter is received to us for the celebration of Bioethics Day on 30th April. So our Department of Dravya Guna and PDA's College of Ayurveda and Research Center has invited her for a guest lecture on ethical review process, which is very important for all teachers, guides, and MD and PhD students in the field of Ayurveda. So I request Dr. Supriya Balerao Madam to start your lecture, madam.
Thank you, Dr. Ila. And I'm very happy that you are continuously arranging the lectures in field of ethics. This is our second lecture. We had our first lecture in month of August when we discussed the ethical issues in Ayurveda research. And today we are going to discuss how the proposal should be reviewed ethically. Because as per mandate, all Ayurveda institutions have ethics committees, but how far we are giving justice to the purpose and how far we are successful in reviewing the proposal from ethical viewpoint, that today we will see. And I would request you that please continue arranging such kind of lectures, as we will see in my presentation also that one of the requisite for the ethics committee members is that they should update their knowledge about ethics. In our field, generally it is believed that whoever is an Ayurveda expert is ethics expert. But as we know now that statistics is a different field and statisticians are different and Ayurvedic expertise is a different thing. And a statistician is a different, biostatistician is different, and a statistician who knows Ayurveda and understands the data from Ayurveda perspective is a very rare kind of person to find out. So likewise, ethics is also a specialized field, and whatever we are going to discuss today are a few things which I have learned while doing my PG diploma in bioethics. And this will tell you that we do not actually consider all these aspects while reviewing the ethics committee proposals. So rather than spending more time in the introduction, I will share my screen.
Yes, definitely, madam. We will continue.
Yes, so that is what is expected, because this is a unique college which is arranging lectures specifically on ethics, and that is much needed topic, because it is not that easy. As we understand that statistics is a technical subject, and statistics has its own principles, its own methodology. Likewise, ethics is also a separate subject, and it definitely, now there are degrees, diplomas being offered in ethics, so definitely it is a separate branch of ethics, and not every Ayurveda expert qualifies to be an ethical expert. That is something which we have to keep in mind when we will go ahead. So as told, and as all of you know, that today's topic is ethical review of a proposal. We all know that what is the purpose of having ethics committees in our institutions? This is well discussed, everybody knows, and we have also seen in our last lecture that purpose of ethics committee or purpose of reviewing the protocols by an ethics committee is to safeguard the dignity, rights, safety, and well-being of all actual or potential research participants. Here the term, whenever we look these things, ethics is in a border of science and law. So whatever term is used is very particular and has some meaning. So here very clearly it is mentioned that actual or potential research participant. That means even if you are screening the individuals for recruitment in your study, they become potential research participants, and safeguarding their dignity, their rights, their safety is also equally important, as we are going to protect the rights, safety, and dignity of the participants who will be recruited in the study. So this is the basic purpose of ethics committee, and in all institutions, ethics committees are formed with these objective, and they should look into these issues. So what makes research ethical? First of all, whenever we are planning any research, whenever we are doing any research, it should have some social value, social translational value. That means it should be of use to someone in the society. Otherwise, that research is of no use. Second point is it should be scientifically valid. If you are using the methodology sometime old in 1950s, that is not acceptable. So scientific validity is another point. The third point is fair selection of study population. Whenever you are selecting the study population, you should give equal chance to everybody. If I am doing a study who is going, means in which the treatment beneficial for COVID-19 is going to be explored or evaluated, I should not recruit only my friends and acquaintances whom I know and whom I want to get benefited. That won't be a fair selection of study population. The fourth thing and very important thing which we are going to see in much detail, that is a favorable risk benefit ratio. So whenever you are doing any research, the risk should be minimum and the benefit should be maximum. And if not, you should see to it that benefits have to be increased in your research design or in the way you are carrying out research. But the risk benefit ratio should be favorable, of course, in terms of benefits. Then the review which ethics committee does has to be independent. There should not be any force or any kind of compulsion on ethics committee that they should take some decision. For example, if your principal's application comes to you for review, then also you should be able to do it or review it independently and without any fear, without any obligation, and that will be called as independent review. And mind you that you will say that who will do this? This will be then this will be an automatic question. But let me tell you that in very good institutions, in very good ethics committees, the review is done completely independent, and even the proposals of principal, of deans are being rejected. It is not like that the chair gives right that every proposal which comes from principal has to be approved. Then the informed consent process, that everybody knows that before recruiting a study participant, before carrying out any study related procedure, we have to first take informed consent of the participant. And last time we had discussed, but just to recapitulate, why it is informed, because we have to give whole complete information of the study to the participant first, and then if he agrees to that, you have to get his signature. So you inform the participant completely about the study details, and then his consent is documented. That's why it is an informed consent, and of course it is a written consent, because if it is not written, it is not done, is a rule of GCP. So the consent should be informed. Then respect for participants and communities. That is important thing, that whenever you are dealing with participants or with some specific community, we should display a strong level of respect for the participants as well as the communities. And lastly, the partnerships which will be built through research should be collaborative in research, and this kind of collaborative partnerships should be encouraged, because ultimately it will help to progress the science. So these all 8 factors makes the research ethical. Now, we all know that what are the basic principles of ethics. There are 4 basic principles. Autonomy, that means patients or participants' right need to be reserved, protected. Beneficence and non-beneficence, that means there should be no harm and there should be some kind of benefit to the participant, and there should be justice, there should be equality, there should be, as I told you, that I shouldn't recruit only the participants whom I know or whom I want to be benefited. So that is the meaning of justice. Another example I would like to give you about justice is, now there is a shortage of oxygen, shortage of beds, shortage of whatever. So it should not happen like he is in some position, is getting the kind of medicines, and somebody who is underprivileged is not getting the things which actually he needs most. So there we are not executing the principle of justice. So these are the 4 basic principles of ethics. And when I was doing the diploma in bioethics, we were taught that every research proposal, every single situation which comes in front of us, we should assess it on the basis of these 4 principles. Now, when the applicability of these 4 principles come, how we assess that in a proposal, the autonomy is being protected, and for that, there is a process of informed consent. How to assess that beneficence is there and there is no non-maleficence? There is non-maleficence. For that, we have to do the risk-benefit assessment. For justice, we have to see recruitment strategy, how the participants, how the patients are going to get recruited. So if we see these 4 things, the 4 basic ethics principles get covered. And that is the first job of ethics committee, that these 4 principles need to be protected and have to be checked, have to be reviewed on the basis of informed consent document, risk benefit assessment, recruitment strategy. Now, coming to this risk benefit assessment, sometimes when we submit a proposal to ethics committee, in some ethics committee forms, there is an inbuilt question like what is the risk benefit ratio? So here we have to, means investigators, as an investigator, we have to suggest that in my proposal, these are the risks which are anticipated and there are the some benefits which are anticipated, and then the ethics committee will look into the risk and benefits which are listed by you and take a decision that yes, benefits are more, so we can go ahead with this proposal. And regarding recruitment strategy, I have already cleared that how we should look into it, that there is no injustice to anybody while recruiting participants or patients in the study. As we will go ahead, this point will get more clear. So while doing ethics, when you are sitting in ethics committee, Dr. Ila told that I am serving as chairperson of 3 ethics committees. So it is not just, honor that I'm serving as a chairperson of 3 ethics committees, but it is a whole lot of responsibility also, that I am responsible. Suppose in one EC meeting, there are 10 proposals discussed, and in each proposal, if you consider that there are 30 participants, so I am, as a chairperson, responsible for 300 individuals. So it is a whole lot of responsibility when you sit in the ethics committee and when you review a proposal. So what all you have to consider while reviewing a proposal? First of all, the law. What is the local and international law applicable? You will say that we are mostly reviewing the Ayurveda proposals, and where there is a concern of law and where the local and international law will come. And our proposals are very simple. We do very simple studies as a MD PhD thesis. And from where you are, from where these things will come, and why are you telling us all these things? But as we are growing, as we are doing different kinds of studies, now let us take example of Akudi College of Ayurveda, which has planned this particular lecture. So they have recently completed 2 studies which are funded by Ayush Ministry, and they were in a today's hot topic, COVID-19. They are doing a lot of pharma sponsored studies. So we are going beyond the circle of MD and PhD thesis. So we have to know what are the laws. simple thing that if you are doing any foreign collaboration, if you are just like, you just feel like I'm sending data to some of my sister or brother or friend in US and he is going to analyze my data sitting over there. But let me tell you that even for sending this data from one country to another, there are some guidelines applicable. You cannot just send the data because you feel that the person who is sitting in US will do the statistical analysis in a very great way. We will see what is that guideline, that also we will see. Then the ethos of workplace, social and cultural overtones. And last time we had discussed this issue that it is not right that in a Ramadan season, you are asking the participants to take pills or take some procedures, ghee for panchakarma and whatever, because that is not allowed. So every country has its social and cultural values different, and we have to respect those social and cultural values also when we are sitting in ethics committee. And if you remember, and those who were there, there last time, I have given an example that I have approached one oncosurgeon in a very well-known hospital in Pune, and for a clinical trial on cancer, and that trial was on omega 3, and that omega 3 was extracted from fish. So he was from a community where non-veg is not allowed. So he became so angry, so hyper, that the thing which I am not consuming, you are asking me to give it to my patient, this will never be done. So, you know, there are different issues, social and cultural sensitivities. We have to protect them, we have to take their care. Then ethical guidelines, which guidelines we are following? Definitely we have to follow ICMR guidelines, and I have told you last time also, I am telling you again today that ICMR guideline is a beautiful piece of literature, and everyone who is doing research must read ICMR guidelines just for sake of getting knowledge. It is such a beautifully written guideline. It covers each and every small and big point. So everybody must go through the ICMR guidelines. And ultimately, you have to ask yourself a question that when I give permission or approval to a particular proposal, can I sleep at night? Or do I feel like I have done some injustice while sanctioning the proposal or while not approving the proposal, both ways? So if you can sleep peacefully at the night of ethics committee, that means you have done really an ethical review, because you do not have any confusion about whatever decision you have made in the meeting. So these are the basic 4 points which one needs to consider while doing a ethical review. Now, what are the types of review? There is an initial review while approving the proposal. Then there is a continuing review. That means anything goes wrong during the study, adverse events, or any other thing, any problem you have. Suppose you start a study in osteoarthritis, it is Sandivat, and you find out like you have quoted or you have mentioned the age limit as 18 to 60 or 34, 35 to 60. Let us take an example. And there is a disclaimer that whatever examples I am giving you are very hypothetical. Please don't say that we are not doing like this, or why are you calling it as osteoarthritis. These are just examples, and we have to consider them only for sake of examples. So suppose we are doing a study in osteoarthritis, and I have mentioned in my protocol or synopsis, whatever you call, while submitting to ethics committee, that the age limit will be 35 to 60. But when you start the clinical trial, when you actually start the study, you realize that maximum number of patients are in the age group of 60 above. Now there is a catch that you have mentioned 35 to 60, but you are getting patients above 60 more. So what you will do? You will start recruiting the patients about 60 as you feel like, or as you are getting, as it is your convenience. So no, you have to take ethics committee approval for that. You have to inform the ethics committee. Another example I will give you, that we are working on a project where we are giving yoga interventions, yoga asanas, and some meditation practices to the pre-diabetic individuals. Now, since there is a lockdown and group meetings are not allowed in our state, we have shifted to online mode. Now, In this case, we have to inform the ethics committee that we have shifted from in-person yoga sessions to online yoga sessions. And for that, for considering these kind of changes, first of all, the investigators, the students, the guides, whoever is doing research should make a practice to inform these changes to ethics committee. That is the first thing. And second thing is ethics committee should meet more frequently. They should not meet only once in a year to give approval to the PG projects and then tata bye bye. This should not be the situation. They should keep meeting at regular intervals and review these kind of requests, these kind of letters which will come from the investigators. Here, the investigator term I am using for PG students, guides, the Ayush kind of projects doing investigators, the MUHS projects, whoever is doing MUHS projects, those investigator, pharma studies, whoever is investigating a study drug or a procedure or any other lifestyle intervention, I'm referring them as investigator here. So investigators should make a practice that they should inform these things to ethics committee, and ethics committee should also meet frequently, at least at some regular intervals, 3 monthly, 6 monthly, based on the kind of letters, number of requests received at the ethics committee end. Then there is an expedited review. In certain cases, like in a situation of pandemic, there has to be expedited review. You cannot wait for giving approval that we are meeting only 1 yearly. So you have to wait till our next meeting happens. Till then, the pandemic will disappear, maybe. I mean, this is a high hope, but maybe this situation can come. So, sir, in certain cases, you have to do expedited review, and even for some proposals where blood collection is not mentioned or is not required, you are just filling up some forms and taking some information from the participants. There much harm is not expected to the study participants. In that case also expedited reviews can be done. And what is the difference between the full review and expedited review? The full reviews have to have everybody, all the chairperson, secretary, all the members which are required for the ethics running in an ethics committee meeting, they all have to be present. But for expedited review, uh, not all members are required to be present, and sometimes it can be done even with a discussion between secretary and chairperson. This is also allowed in some cases. And then there are some proposals which are exempted from review. For example, I have published recently one paper which is CTRI analysis of COVID studies done on Ayush interventions. So I just reviewed the CTRI. The CTRI, I know, I think, I hope everybody knows, Clinical Trial Registry of India. So whatever studies have been registered on CTRI, which involved Ayush interventions, they were, taken into consideration, and their characteristics were analyzed. So I have used a secondary data. If you remember the data classification, primary data and secondary data. Primary data is one which you collect as investigator, whereas secondary data is already available. You do some analysis of some policies, of some guidelines, of some information published in the domain. Suppose you want to just see that from 1st of March till today, how many cases are there in the state of Maharashtra, and what was the rise in the cases. So you are not actually going to the field and doing the cases, finding out the cases and documenting them. This data is already available on Health and Family Welfare Ministry's website. You are just taking that data and analyzing that. Such proposals can be exempted from review of ethics committee. But who decides that? Can I decide that it is exempted and I can just go ahead with I just assume that this is exempted from review? It cannot be done. I have to inform ethics committee that I am doing this kind of study, and then ethics committee just writes to me that this doesn't involve human volunteers or human participation. So this proposal is exempted from the review. So this letter also is important because sometimes you need to submit it to journals. So these are three types of review. And the important thing is that for doing review, how we will do review, that process must be established. Like how, what will be our procedures, what we will consider, and that has to be established a priori. That means before starting a meeting, or before setting a ethics committee, or before starting a procedure of ethics committee, we should have the process well established. Just to give you a simple example, that when a proposal is being presented, how the committee will come to a decision, whether it will be based on voting, because some people may not like that proposal, some people will have some objection in the proposal, some people will praise that proposal. So how we will come to the consensus that whether to give approval or not to give? So whether we will do it by voting, or whether we will go by that whatever chairperson says, that is our final thing. So what is your procedure that you have to mention in your standard operating procedures, that is SOP. So every ethics committee must have standard operating procedures. Second thing is training of EC members. That is what I referred to you in the beginning, that the ethics committee members should get training, and that too time to time. It is not like that I have taken training in 2000, so now I don't need to take any training. This is not done. You have to keep continuing the training, because the guidelines change, the rules change, so everybody should be aware of the changes. For example, now every ethics committee which is involved in biomedical research has to be has to get registered with DHR, Department of Health Research. So we need not to go to CDSCO. That is something which we should be knowing. We, in the sense investigators also, and those who are sitting in the ethics committee, they should to definitely know. For that, they need a continued training, and that's why these kind of lectures are helpful. So again, what are the prerequisites of ethics committee? We have seen in this earlier lecture. We know this. We are repeatedly saying also it should be it should be an independent review. That means it should not be dependent upon the administration of your institution. That I told you very clearly, that even you can reject the proposals of your dean and principal if you are truly doing independent review. If the ethics committee is working truly independently, they should be free of any kind of fear, or they should not be apprehensive, or they should not be like what will happen. This kind of fear should not be in their mind. They should be, the members who are sitting, or the collectively the ethics committee should be competent. So I hope I have told you that what is competence. Competence doesn't depend on education. For example, I am MD in Ayurveda, but I am into research since last 20 years. So though I have qualification, as of now I am not competent to do clinical practice, because I have lost the touch with clinical practice. So competency is skill based, and competency is different than education. Consistence, that means whatever the review process is established, or whichever is a review process the committee is following, they should be consistent. They should be in line with the review process which is form which is made, and the ethics review should be timely. It shouldn't happen that the proposal was given 3 months back and now the ethics committee, then it will lose the importance. Sometimes it is possible that whole importance will get lost. So the ethics committee should meet timely, and the review should be done timely. The members, who should be the members, how many members, that everything is mentioned in ICMR guidelines. There need to be SOP, standard operating procedures, for every committee, that how frequently they will meet, what quorum will be there, what kind of consensus process they will follow. All these things should be there in the SOPs. And as I said, that which guidelines the ethics committee is going to follow, what will be quorum at meeting, that whether all members should be present, or there can be at least 5 members, 6 members should be there for the meeting. The quorum can be different for different ethics committees. And the meeting processes, minutes, archiving, these all things are important. That whenever a meeting is called, Then the letter should go to the investigators or whoever generally submits proposal. The minutes have to be kept. There should be a recording of every document which is submitted to ethics committee. For every proposal, there has to be a file, like suppose, because what happens, in our colleges, the ethics committee meets only once in a year. So for every BG project, we have only initial review, the proposal, and then the approval letter. But it is very unlikely that the student will not come across any problem during his 2 years if he is doing honestly. That there will be some recruitment issues. There will be some kind of adverse event or something unexpected. Some problem may arrive. So the investigator has to communicate that time. But since ethics committee do not meet, ethics committee do not insist, nobody informs the ethics committee. And if actually everybody starts reporting these things, then for every project, ethics committee should maintain a file, and all the files should be maintained, archived, stored. So these are the prerequisites for ethics committee review. So what is submitted or what is expected to be reviewed, in other words, and there are lot many documents starting from project submission application form, protocol or any amendment to the protocol, informed consent document, its translation in English, in regional language, in our case Marathi. Sometimes ethics committee also ask for back translation. That means when the English informed consent is converted into Marathi, the Marathi if converted back into English, it should give us the same thing. So back translation, then case record form, patient instruction card, identity card, diary. Now sometimes identity card is also mentioned, if not OPD paper is there, uh, just to ensure that the patient really exists and that is not a cooked data. So for that, an identity card like Aadhaar or something is also asked sometime. Question is if used any. Then subject recruitment procedures. If you are going to give some advertisement or notices for recruitment of the procedure, recruitment of subjects, then all those advertisements should be pre-approved by the ethics committee. You cannot just give an advertisement in the newspaper or put a notice on your institutional notice board also without informing the ethics committee. And these documents which I showed you in this slide are applicable to academic research or any kind of research. Then there are some documents which are required for pharma sponsored or government sponsored studies, that CV of the investigator, log of delegation of responsibility, because in a funded project there will be a PI, principal investigator, co-investigator, then there will be a study coordinator. So who is going to do what? That kind of responsibility log has to be there. Then current status of ongoing studies conducted by PI. This is also important, and in our institutions, it so happens that a teacher is doing only those many studies, the number of students he has, or a student is doing only his own research project. But in some institutions, a teacher is also involved in some government studies, pharma studies, or MUHS studies, departmental activities. So he may have 2, 3, 4, 5 projects also. And then the ethics committee also reviews that whether the PI will be able to give sufficient time for the study which he is now proposing. Then GCP training certificates of the PI, COI, these are specifically required for pharma or government sponsored studies, but there is no harm in asking for academic studies also. Regulatory approvals, suppose a pharma study is there, then FDA marketing, manufacturing license, whether it is there. Then for foreign collaboration, as I have told you in the beginning, even for data sending and data, what to say, getting the data analyzed from there, you have to have data sharing. For data sharing also HMSC, that is Health Ministry Screening Committee is there. So we have to take the approval from them. BARC for radioisotope studies if you are using any, and admin approval of collaborating institutions. That means suppose you are collaborating with my institution, even my director should give me permission, and that letter should be in your file that I have been given, or I have been approved to work with you in your collaboration. So that kind of admin approval letter of collaborating institution should also be there. In case of pharma studies, clinical trial agreement, investigator brochure, compensation for participation, what amount for travel and the daily wages loss, if any compensation is going to be offered to the study participants, and compensation for research related injuries. The first compensation is for the daily or the routine procedures, not daily, but the routine procedures, that if the participant is coming to study site for participation, then he will come by rickshaw or bus. So that kind of compensation, that expenses you will give him. And the other kind of compensation is for something, if something goes wrong, if the participant gets some injury, then who will bear the cost of that injury, because he's participating in your study and he has got some illness or he has got some accident. So who will bear that cost? So these compensations need to be thought of. Now in MD PhD students thesis, generally, and that's why I said this is applicable more to the pharma studies, that we do not give any kind of participation, because already the students are doing the research by investing their own money. So we do not want to make them or to give them more trouble, financial trouble, and that's why we do not ask these kind of compensations in our students thesis. But yes, for pharma studies we have to ask for. And insurance policy, now by default for herbal pharma companies also, we have started asking the insurance for the study participants. For example, if you are doing COVID studies and if something goes wrong, then what? So in such studies, we ask the company to take a blanket insurance for all study participants, and companies do that. For government studies, we consider the cost in our budget itself, that for the study participants, if something goes wrong, if the patients become more in a patient shifts or goes into moderate category from mild, then if he needs hospitalization, then the expenses will get covered under this insurance policy. So for government projects, we consider it in our budget. For pharma sponsored studies, we ask the pharma company to get the insurance policy. Now we are coming to a very important part. I request the participant not to draw anything on the screen, because now also I can see one red line which is there. Some Dr. Geeta has drawn that. So please don't do this. If you are not interested in the lecture, you may please leave the lecture, but don't do these things. So what are the elements of review? What exactly we have to review? Till now, what we have thought is just introductory kind of things. But what exactly we have to review? The first thing is scientific design and conduct of the study. The second thing is risk benefit assessment. Third is recruitment of research participants, how it is being done. Fourth is care and protection of research participants. And you will see that all these things are in line with my very first slide, that what is the objective of having ethics committee, or what is an objective of reviewing the proposals by ethics committee. Protection of research participant confidentiality is the fifth point, informed consent sixth, and community consideration is the seventh point, which we need to consider while reviewing any proposal. Now let us see one by one each of these points. So what are the elements of review? The first point is scientific design and conduct of the study. So here the words are very specific, design and conduct of the study. That means if the ethics committee is not a research review committee also of the college, the committee has no right to say that why you have used that drug, this drug, instead of that you should have that drug, or this is not a appropriate procedure to follow in this particular disease. That is the thing which will be looked after by the research review committee. And here the ethics committee will review the study's appropriateness or study design's appropriateness from the perspective of research methodology only, not in terms of drug or disease or avastha or whatever the anupan you should have used honey, you should have used mud, but you have used ghee. These kind of suggestions are not expected from ethics committee. But ethics committee can comment that this objective is not very clear, or the objective is not very appropriate. The statistical methodology, including sample size calculation, because we know that we generally assume 30 as a sample size for MD studies and 100 for PhD studies, which is not at all the right thing. And even we can survive with less sample size, or for some studies we may require additional sample size. So sample size calculation has to be done. If we have considered a larger sample size than what is required, then it is loss of resources. If we have used smaller sample size than what is required, then we may not get appropriate results, and at the end still we want to show the good results. So this is a tricky thing, and that's why we have to calculate sample size. Potential for reaching sound conclusion with smallest number of research participants is what the ethics committee will look for. That using minimum number of research participants, if you are getting sound conclusions, then they will ask you to reduce your sample size. Okay, why? Because if the drug is not effective, why you will unnecessarily subject the more number of patients to that particular intervention. So smallest number of research ethics committee will look for, and justification for the use of control arms and justification for use of placebo. These two things has to be justified, and ethics committee has to review that. If the investigators have proposed placebo, then whether it is justified, what is a clinical condition, these are the ethical issues from the in the scientific design and conduct of the study. And remember that bad science can never be, it can never bring good ethics, can never bring good ethics. So the science has to be good in the ethics in any proposal which we submit. That's how the ethics will also automatically come into picture. And the science has to be looked from these perspectives and not from the perspective like why this disease, why this drug. This is not under the purview of ethics committee. Then the main thing is risk benefit assessment. So let us first think what all kind of risk can be there. So what all kind of benefits can be there. So first of all, the participant can directly get some benefits by participating in the study. He will get treatment, his disease will disappear. So these are the direct benefits which participants will have. Sometimes participants do not directly have any benefit, but society can have benefit. So societal benefits in the sense, just to give you an example, you want to find out that in a particular disease condition, which Prakriti individuals are more seen, or in other words, which Prakriti is more prone to, a particular disease. So those who will fill the form for you and give you, allow you to do Prakriti assessment will not be directly benefited unless you give them some lifestyle advices. But generally that is not done. So they will not get any benefits. But ultimately, your research should give some lead to society that, okay, if Pitta Prakriti people are there, then they are going to, they are more prone to hypertension or some bleeding disorders, so they should avoid this kind of diet. If these things are formed, if these things emerge from your research, then that is a benefit to society. Then there has to be some benefit to scientific knowledge, it should advance. So either of these benefits have to be there. Some benefits can be to the institutional, that institution gets name. Like 2 projects were granted to Ayurveda College, PDA's Ayurveda College. So it is an honor for the institution. So institution should get some benefits in terms of monetary gain, in terms of some name or fame. So there can be some institutional benefits. And lastly, community benefits. That means a particular community. Suppose you are using some plant from a community which is using it as a folk medicine, or some practices which are being followed by some particular community. Then when you will do research, when you will publish it, when some company approaches you, let us assume that some company approaches you for marketing that drug, then some benefit should go to that community, or that community should get some royalty or something of the benefit which you will cover. So these are the different kind of benefits which a project can, or a research project should give. And at least should see to it that first 3-4 benefits, if not community, are getting covered at least one of the benefits. So whenever you will review a proposal, when you are sitting in ethics committee, at least see to it that either of the benefit is there. Then coming to harms. So what all kind of harms can be there? First is physical harm. When you are collecting blood, you just feel that you feel that it is just a blood collection. What is a big deal in that? But sometimes hematoma can get formed, or sometimes some individuals may get fainted after seeing blood. So there is a physical harm. There can be psychological harm, like just simple filling the prakriti questionnaire, and you have casually asked a question, do you become angry quite often? A very simple question which is there in the prakriti assessment. But suppose that person has got recently divorced because of his angry nature. He may get traumatized after you ask him this question. You never know. You are not doing it intentionally. But there can be a psychological harm when you ask some kind of questions which are related to personal information of a person. Then there can be social harm that effect on one's interaction or relationship with other. Stigmatization can happen, like some person is having a disease, HIV or leprosy, then knowing that status can affect his social relations. So that is a stigmatization, that is a social harm. Then economic harm, that a person is coming to you for his for from his place to your institution to participate in the study, and there may be loss of his daily wages. He has to, I mean, spend some expenses on his travel. Maybe he cannot take his child to his class or his school. So one day fees of his child is also lost. There can be indirectly many things. So economic harm is there. Legal harm. Now you will say, what kind of legal harm comes here in the research proposal? Suppose you are collecting information on drug addicts and their behavior or something like that. Now having drugs is a illegal activity, and if you are doing that, then and if you are publishing such kind of research, it has some legal connotations. And then by law they can, means the court can ask you to give names of these people who are addicts and try to find out from where they have got drugs. So there is a lot of legal harm in this. And harm to dignity, that means when the study participants come to you, how you treat them, how you respect them, because we know that in ethics, respect is the first thing. So there can be different types of harms. Don't just think of physical harms, that I'm just filling a questionnaire, there is nothing in that. But you never know that this questionnaire filling can also have psychological harms, social harms, economic harms. So whenever a proposal comes in front of ethics committee, they should see that what are the benefits, whether there is any benefit to participant, society, scientific knowledge, or institution, or how many, and on other side, which kind of harm is associated with this proposal: physical, psychological, social, economic, legal, dignitary harm. And then the risk benefit analysis has to be done, that the harms are very less, there is nothing much, the questions which are asked in the questionnaire are also very simple, and that is not going to affect even if the person is taking information from HIV patients, is not going to reveal their identity. So there is no social harm. So this kind of risk benefit analysis has to be done. Further, for the risk benefit assessment, criteria for prematurely withdrawing research participants. We very simply say sometimes that a participant was withdrawn from the study because he was not compliant, or he developed some sort of adverse effect. So he was prematurely withdrawn from the study. So what is planned after his withdrawal? Or you are just going to leave, the investigator is just going to leave the participant. Or criteria for this is for individual participant, and this is the second point is less likely, but sometimes if the study is not giving good results, it is not going in the way which we are expected, the recruitment rate is very slow, or the study participants who have completed the studies are not really benefited, then the study can be even stopped in between. And then what will happen, to to the participants who are ongoing. So these are a few questions which need to be asked or which need to be considered while doing risk benefit assessment. Then provisions made for monitoring and auditing conduct of research. Are there any provisions? Now, in my case, I will explain you that we do generally the government sponsored studies. And in government sponsored studies, there is no mechanism like pharma industry that a monitor will come and do the monitoring of our documents. But then we try to involve a monitor who is not related to our study, who is expert in this clinical research domain, who comes to us and reviews all the documents which we have generated. He sees everything properly, and if there are any lacunae, he points out that. And this is done in a very independent manner. So these kind of monitoring provisions, are there any? Drug Safety Monitoring Board. Now, do not have any provision of reporting adverse event or violations of the protocol. I always tell my students and whoever is working with me that if the age group or the age limit is written in the protocol is 18 to 60, and suppose one participant comes to you and says, I celebrated my 60th birthday yesterday only. So will you take that participant or not? He had just celebrated his birthday yesterday. So your upper age limit was 60. Will you take him or not? So the answer is no, I will not take. So these are the simple things, but who monitors and who keeps the watch on these? No adverse events or no unexpected events are reported. No change in the protocols are reported. So DSMB, that is a Data Safety Monitoring Board, is generally formed for reviewing all these things. Safety monitoring, that is what is the role of this DSMB. Now, just to give you information that for all Ayush sponsored COVID studies, there is a DSMB setup, and that DSMB meets every fortnightly or every monthly and reviews the status of all different kind of proposals, projects which are being run. Whatever data is generated, the committee looks it from different angles. So in an institution, there can be a DSMB formed, and the DSMB can look after certain things, these things. Then qualifications of PI and site facilities for diagnosing and managing serious adverse events. So whether there is any ICU available in women, suppose in a woman procedure. Now you will say that, no, this never happens. We have never seen in our 20 years. But we shouldn't wait till the thalidomide situation happens in case of Ayurveda. So we have to be proactive. If something goes wrong, if the patient gets dehydrated, if his pulse rate goes very low, or something happens suddenly, then what are the strategies to manage these serious adverse events? That is something which we need to ask. Then we are coming to a very important point of risk benefit assessment, that is handling the vulnerability. We know that vulnerability means that person is has no say. His autonomy is compromised. He has he is not executing his choice to participate or not to participate. So that is a vulnerable population, and there are two types of vulnerability. First is categorical vulnerability, which is based on, means certain groups in the society are by default they are vulnerable, like pregnant women, human fetuses, neonates, prisoners, children. These are the few examples which are quoted that they have no say in the process. So these groups are vulnerable only. So they are called as categorically vulnerable. And there is another kind of vulnerability which is known as contextual vulnerability. That means otherwise the person is not in a categorical classes, but in certain situations he becomes vulnerable. For example, there are different aspects of contextual vulnerability. First is cognitive or communicative vulnerability. In individuals who are adults but do not have cognitive capacity to understand the informed consent form, so they are cognitively vulnerable. Or the person who is in ICU, he is not in a cognitive phase, he is cognitively vulnerable. So in them, how the informed choice will be facilitated, and how will the barriers preventing participants to exercise choice be overcome? So how these issues will be handled? So cognitive vulnerability is first type of contextual vulnerability. Second is institutional vulnerability. That means if the institutional officials tell that you have to participate in the study, then others don't have no choice than participate. So suppose tomorrow if I do any study and if I tell my students that, no, I mean, you cannot say anything, you have no choice, you have to just participate, otherwise your confidential report which I will give it to director will be affected. Then what do you think what they will do? So this is an institutional vulnerability. So the second type of vulnerability is institutional vulnerability, and this happens many times that students relatives, we ask them to participate in the study. That is institutional vulnerability. Third vulnerability type is differential vulnerability. It is not differential, it is differential. That is a respectful vulnerability for husband, mother-in-law, or in old age for children, that you have, they are obliging you sort of, so you don't have any say. And that is a differential vulnerability. If mother-in-law says that you have to undergo abortion, the daughter-in-law doesn't have any choice in many cases. So that is a differential vulnerability. Then medical vulnerability, for example, seriously ill patients. Now let us take example of COVID-19, and you will understand the medical vulnerability, that whatever medicine is available, people are taking it. And they are so vulnerable that if you tell them that, okay, I have some drug, which is a wonder drug, which is a miraculous drug, they will take part. So this is a medical vulnerability. But in that, we have to take care that we are not, means they are not under therapeutic misconception. What is therapeutic misconception? That whenever we are recruiting participants in the study, we should tell them very clearly that this is a research study and doesn't have foolproof evidence of its efficacy. This is not a routinely practiced thing in our OPD or in our clinic. And otherwise, the patient feels that it is something which is routinely used therapy, which is being given to me. So that is a therapeutic misconception, and that shouldn't happen. An independent person not related to research and treatment should therefore provide information and facilitate the informed consent. So these are types of vulnerability. Then there is economic vulnerability. You know that there are blood banks. There are banks of volunteers who give blood on regular interval at regular regular interval because they need money. Similarly, when bioavailability, bioequivalence studies are carried out, there are individuals, who participate in this studies only for the sake of money. So now new thing is coming up that means there are ethicists are asking this question, that when a healthy individual is participating in a study, whether his family members should also be informed and their consent should also be taken, that the person is not doing anything wrong. So that also needs to be understood. And then there is a social vulnerability, that certain castes, certain tribes. You remember the syphilis study, the Tuskegee syphilis study, where the Black Americans were only subjected to that study, to study the course of syphilis, and were not given any kind of treatment. So this was a social vulnerability because only Black Americans were subjected to the study. So this is a social vulnerability. So there are different kinds of vulnerability, and when the participants are getting recruited, we should see that there is no vulnerability in the picture, and the participants are taking part because they are interested in the study. They understand that it is a research study and it is their interest, they are participating. Then recruitment, the third point. First point we saw was the science behind the study. Second was risk benefit assessment. Third is recruitment of research participants. So who will be the participants? Their gender, age, literacy, and their vulnerability has to be assessed. That is, at the end, this is the bottom line, that a vulnerability should be assessed. How will the participants be contacted and recruitment conducted? So I have told you that if it is through advertisement, notices, they should be approved by ethics committee, because nowhere it should be written that free of cost. Then it becomes an undue inducement of some incentive. So nothing should be there like this. So therefore the advertisements need to be checked by ethics committee. Then how will full information be given to potential research participants? Because generally the study coordinators tell only what they want to tell, and they want just that the participants should get recruited. So somebody has to, monitor, train the person who is taking the informed consent, and these are very, very important aspects. We just feel like तो तर एक फॉर्म आहे, फक्त भरून घ्यायचा आहे, सही घ्यायची, म्हणजे त्याच्यावर फक्त सही घ्यायची. It is not just a form, but it is a process that if the participants have understood everything. And there are studies done in modern medicine that how informed consent is really informed. Means the study participants, when they were approached and they were asked that whether you were knowing that this is a research study, many participants have said, no, we were not aware. We thought that we are being given some drug. So this is, how we should document research informed consent, and that's why whoever is taking informed consent becomes a important person. Inclusion exclusion criteria for research participants. So in that also we should check that in inclusion we select a group of participants. So whether in that group, because of participating in the study, are you seeing some risk? Are you anticipating some benefits? So there also, from inclusion exclusion also, we should do the risk benefit analysis. The fourth point is care and protection of research participant. So it starts from suitability of investigator, his experience, his training, his facilities. Then you are confident that, okay, the appropriate care and protection of the participants will happen. Then if the person is taking some anti-diabetic, antihypertensive, or any other kind of drug, calcium supplements, whatever. So will you continue those therapies, or they will be withdrawn or withheld for the purpose of the research? And if they are withdrawn or withheld, then why? And what will happen? Again, there you can assess the risk and benefits. What medical care will be provided to research participants during and after the course of research? That means we have discussed this, I think, sometimes, that if the person gets some other problem during the course of study, whether you will give any other medical care, and after completion of study, will you say that, okay, now my study is over, you can go home, and especially this is applicable for patients, that some drug which is still in experimental domain, and you have given that drug, and now if the study is over, sometimes our students also prepare some different drugs. They find out some different formulae from text, they prepare that drug, and then that is not available in the market. So after the study is over, next they what the patient is expected to do, that has to be made clear to the patient, that after stopping the treatment trial, or after completing the study course, you will be shifted to another similar drug or whatever it is. So that is the post trial access, that what you will give to the patients, and that must be described possibly in the informed consent document. Will the patient have to bear any cost? So our approach is what, this is routine anyway. Patient is going to come to clinic or OPD for taking his medicine. So what is a big deal? Why I should uh, give him some money? But remember that sometimes you call the patients deliberately for some additional visits, which he wouldn't have come otherwise for his routine clinical course. So it is not routine anyways kind of situation. And reward and compensation for research participants are the participants being given anything like money, services in the sense, if you participate in my study, which is on Panchakarma procedure, then we will give you free sitting of one Snehan, whole Abhyanga, whole body massage. So this is services, or some gifts are is something like that is promised. So that is what the ethics committee should review. Then the provisions for compensation, treatment in the case of injury, disability, death of a research participant. Again, everybody here listening to the lecture will say that no. In Ayurvedic clinical trials, death never happens. But I'm again telling you, you never know what can happen. So you have to be you have to take all precautions. You have to be vigilant. That is the thing, and that is what ethics committee should look for. That in cases now, I am on one ethics committee. I won't take name of the college, but they are doing a clinical study in cancer. So in that cancer study, not because of drug, but because of the disease per se, patients are dying during the study. So this is a death of a research participant because the participant is in your study and he is dying when he is in your study. So in this case, what will happen? What are the consequences? Insurance we have already talked about, and manner in which the results of the research will be reported and published, that without taking name, without revealing the identity of participants, and completely keeping their confidentiality. This is an important aspect of review process. The fifth point is protection of research participant confidentiality. We have come gradually to this point. So who will have access to the personal data of research participants, including medical records and biological samples? Now, this is basically possible in a research institution setup like us, where we are keeping the biological samples. Let it be, it can be blood, it can be saliva, it can be stool samples. So we are only doing the investigation. So we can keep the samples for years also. We have the minus 80-degree facility, and then we can do as many investigations we want to do on the stored samples. But this is not allowed because ethics committee has given you permission only to do certain parameters. If you want to do another set of parameters, if you want to do investigations for some different cause or for different purpose, you have blood of COVID-19 patients, you have stored, you have done clinical study, now you want to do antibody titer estimation. So you cannot do antibody titer estimation unless ethics committee allows you to do that. So you have to write to ethics committee again, take their permission, and do the estimations. And how will the confidentiality and security of personal information be ensured? That is something comes under the protection of research participant. And informed consent process is the most important thing of all the points because it takes into consideration many aspects. So as I said, it is not just a piece of paper, but it is a process for obtaining informed consent. Who is responsible for obtaining consent has a lot of responsibility. Adequacy, completeness, and understandability of the information to be given to the research participant. I mean, if you write that SARS-CoV-2 is a newly emerged virus, it has now mutated, it has a different strains. So what this information makes sense to the research participants who are not from medical background, they don't understand anything. So whatever you will write, that should be in language which will be understandable to the participant. That is the first thing. Completeness, that means whatever is there in the protocol has to be there in the informed consent document, and it should not be too long that the participants will get bored. It should not be too small that they will not get complete information. So it has to be adequate in length. Who is consenting? Is the person literate, illiterate? In case of the illiterate participant, what will happen if the participants are in between the age group of 7 to 12 years? Now, for Kaumar Britya studies, if you are doing some learning memory studies in the age group where participants are 7 to 12 years old, there the children assent also becomes important along with the parents consent. So both the things have to be, because by law it is considered that the children who are in the age group 7 to 12, they understand many things. So we need to respect them also, we need to respect their identity, and that's why assent has to be taken. So this is many a times ignored point. Assent is not taken in many of the studies. So for 7 to 12 years, we need to take assent. And the last point of the elements of review is community consideration. That is the impact and relevance of the research on the local community and on the concerned communities from which the research participants are drawn. So if you are taking participants from any specific community, uh, I remember I remember one study, and that is very important, that in Parsi community, after death, there is a different procedure how they dispose their body, and that can lead some social and environmental effect also. And it was observed in Mumbai that the Parsi community, if I mean, when they are, if you know the post-death rituals in Parsi community, the vultures take the flesh and all from the dead body, and the vultures started dying in Mumbai. And then when the investigation was done, they were eating this thing, and there were high concentrations of diclofenac was found in the blood of the dead people, also in the vultures blood also. So there was a new research was formed, like whether the Parsi community cannot digest these insects and these kind of drugs, whether they are slow metabolizers of this drug, and lot of research was carried out. But when we submitted the proposal to ethics committee, there was a question, because we have specifically mentioned Parsi community. Certain studies are done, like when we do genomic studies, especially that Maharashtrian population, then how to define Maharashtrian population? Those who are staying in Maharashtra is not a proper definition. So those who are staying here for 3 generations, speaking Marathi in their family, and so what? It is a big definition of Maharashtrian community. But when we are doing this kind of community studies, it becomes a very sensitive issue. And that's why we have to take proper care there. Steps taken to consult with the concerned communities during the course of designing the research, that we have from planning of the research, why we are doing the study only in those communities, that everything has to be made it clear to them. And influence of the community on the consent of individuals, like there is a concept like gatekeeper's consent for community research, or when a specific community has to be involved. And gatekeeper community means whoever is the main person of the community leader, his or her permission has to be taken. So that's why it is called as gatekeeper's consent. His opinions are very influential, so his permission has to be taken. Last 2 slides, we have seen this everything for the initial review, how we will do it. During the continuing review, that means in between, once the proposal is initially approved by the ethics committee, what review they will do in between? Adverse events, as we have discussed, serious adverse events. In some cases, where there are huge number of studies carried out, like hospitals like AIIMS, KEM Mumbai, Tata Hospital, they have subcommittees to just to look into SAEs, serious adverse events. Then annual status reports. Even in Bharati Vidyapeeth, when we are doing clinical studies, I'm talking about Bharati Medical College. So when we are doing the studies, we have to submit annual status reports, like how many participants we have recruited last year, how the study is going on, are there any issues, and all these status has to be submitted. And this then the committee gives us reapproval, a renewal letter, and then only we can continue the study further. So generally we do the students thesis, we give the permission for 2 years. So at least we should make a point, we can give a blanket permission for 2 years, but we can make a point that after 1 year submit a report to ethics committee. And site monitoring, that if generally suppose ethics committee finds that in an annual report or whatever, in during some communication, that one student thesis there is a fast recruitment, very fast he is recruiting, he finished his 30 participants only in 3 months, then ethics committee should be little suspicious and ask him to show. Now here there is no site monitoring, but in individual project monitoring, that how you did the, I mean, how you recruited the participants, how you could finish it so fast. Because as per our knowledge and whatever number of patients available, it shouldn't be so fast. So this is kind of generally for multicentric studies, the ethics committees, or even in an institution where there are number of studies carried out, if the in one particular study there is a very fast recruitment or very slow recruitment or many adverse events, then the ethics committee makes it a point to talk to the investigator and find out what is the reason. So that is a site monitoring. And expedited or exemption from review, there is a ICMR criteria, that in which case we can do expedited review, or in which cases we can give exemption from review. It cannot be just done because the principal investigator is your friend. That is definitely will be an unethical act. So we have to refer to ICMR guidelines, and I have specifically not given the ICMR criteria so that you will go to the ICMR guidelines and at least once you will see what is there in the ICMR guidelines. So in summary, what we discussed today, that the whole goal or whole objective of ethics committee is to minimize risk to participant. Risks should be reasonable in relation to anticipated benefits. Means whether the risks are reasonable in relation to anticipated benefits, that is the question which ethics committee should consider. Participant selection, is there any equitability? Is the participant selection is equitable, or whether a specific strata is getting more promotion, more weightage? Informed consent is adequate, easy to understand, and properly documented. These are the things which should be very clearly conveyed, and very clearly it should be followed, that informed consent is a very important document, so it should be in a terms understandable to participant. Provision for monitoring data to ensure the safety of participants. Provision to protect the privacy of participants and maintain confidentiality of data. So again, these two terms are different. Privacy means when you are taking case history, when you are examining the patient, then there has to be a privacy, and while keeping the data, there should be confidentiality. Safeguard to protect vulnerable participant, that is the main thing. We have seen all different kinds of vulnerability: categorical vulnerability, contextual vulnerability. So we have to understand it very clearly, and contextual vulnerability is something which is seen quite often. In COVID, we have realized it very pronouncedly that the individuals who are educated, who knows that what is what, still they are getting, vulnerable if somebody offers them some treatment, or whether somebody is giving them something, then they are becoming vulnerable. So remember that ethics is like a triangle of three important components. There has to be a balance. The investigator also has to be very particular for reporting the violations in the protocol, deviations in the protocol, if he wants to do any amendments in the protocol, if there are any adverse events, everything must be reported to ethics committee. So there is a lot of science of ethics on one side. There is a science of the disease, science of the treatment on one side. There is an investigator who is keen to do research, who is enthusiastic and wants to do something. And on the third side, there is a laws and ethical guidelines. But this is all fine. There are guidelines. There is an enthusiastic investigator. There is a science, and we all want to update the science. We want to add something to science. But in the center, there has to be the participant and the community for which we are doing this particular research, or whatever activities we are doing in the field of research. So with this, I stop here. Thank you very much. And we can take questions if there are any.
Yes, I think there are some queries in chat box.
Okay, I will just stop sharing. Yes.
Can I read, madam?
I can read. I can.
Yes.
So, there is a question that for DHR registration, how many years of records of IEC required? All guidelines are given on the DHR website. So anyone wants to do registration with DHR should refer to those guidelines, and every step is given in clear details, and we can follow that. There is a question that if we are doing research solely on the basis of questionnaire only, how much we can rely on the results of that? This is a question which is not related to ethics directly. It is a research methodology question because whatever data we will obtain with questionnaires is going to be a subjective, or many times it can be even biased. Bias can be on both sides, on investigator's side who is administering questionnaire, and while giving answers, even the study participant can be biased. Like suppose somebody asks me, do you become angry quite often? So I will answer, no, I'm very sweet person. I will answer in this way. But if you ask, and this question is asked by my student Amit, so he knows how angry I am. So, these are the things, like we have to maintain this balance. There will be a lot of bias in this questionnaire based or subjective based question, subjective assessments. Then there is a question, who are the members of DSMB? Generally, there is a pharmacologist or who understand the drug or the therapy in detail. Then there has to be a statistician and maybe a good clinician or anyone else. Minimum 3 members committee should be there. Why it is necessary to take EC approval from each study site? It is approved by one EC at principal investigator end. So the answer here is that suppose one study is being carried out multi-centric, and one center is in Kerala, one center is in Northeast. So the climatic conditions are different, the cultural sensitivity is different, the social contexts are different, and that's why it is expected that every study site, and moreover we have to understand that what is the responsibility of what is the role of ethics committee to safeguard and protect the rights of the study participants. So suppose the main ethics committee gives main study sites ethics committee gives permission, how can that one committee will take care of the participants who are in south, who are in north, who are in west? So every site has to take permission for their own work, because the ethics committee, although can function globally, its role is locally limited to its own institution. That's why we have to take permission from each EC. Why not to mention anything is free in the patient sheet in terms of medication, therapeutic or investigation if it's sponsored by funding agency? Okay. Even if the study is funded by funding agency, we cannot write it is free, because then the participants' vulnerability, if you remember, the economically vulnerable participants will come to you more because they do not have money to get investigations done or to get the kind of therapies you are offering. So there can be injustice in recruiting the participants as well. So to avoid all this, we should not mention this. There is generally there is a approach or attitude in the society that if something is free, then affluent class thinks like, why should I go there? It is a free, so it is not of my class, or it is not suiting to my what to say, my status, my socio economic status, and they will not participate. So there will be a bias, and that's why we do not ever mention that justice is the principle which we have to follow, and that's why we cannot mention that anything is free. Then there is one more question. If we identify a patient in particular disease condition, and he or she will not able to participate in our study, how can we proceed? If he is not able to participate in the study for whatever reason, we have to respect his autonomy, his free choice, and we have to, not recruit that patient, and we should look for another patient in that case. Mm, then I think I have taken all questions. Still, if anybody has any question, they can ask me. But I would just like to tell you that remember only the 4 principles. Forget everything else. We have to follow the justice. We have to follow the maleficence and non-beneficence. And we have to respect the participants' autonomy. These 4 things we have to fit in our brain, and then we will never do a wrong decision while planning the study if we are on investigator's side, and while evaluating the proposal or reviewing the proposal if we are on ethics committee side. So these 4 principles are the key principles, and we have to follow these principles.
Hello, Supriya madam. Hello, Supriya madam.
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah. I want to ask you one question. You have nicely told us about respect for communities, how to show respect for communities. But what about uh, how to show the respect for participants? Whether in term while we are communicating them about our research, or there are some other methods also.
At all levels, when you are talking or when you are communicating with the participants, you have to display the respect towards them. Means
Yeah.
there should not be any kind of sign from your side like free mil raha hai isliye aake baithe hai. This kind of approach. So that is what I mean to say by respect for participants, that we have to respect them as human beings and we have to treat them as human. You must be remembering the experiments, the Nazi experiments, and the Tuskegee syphilis study, or the kind of situation which is prevailing nowadays. Also, there is no respect. There is nothing. The situation is bad nowadays, so we cannot, follow all the principles. That is one thing, but that is what I mean by respect towards the participants.
Yeah, thank you. And another thing I want to ask, that while stating risk and benefits, whether we should mention that it is in case of using Rasaushadhi. We should mention the side effects caused by that Rasaushadhi, or will you please give an example if anyone has mentioned in the protocol?
Even when we did a clinical study on Triphala, a very well-known and very well-accepted drug, in risk, if it is continued for a duration for 3 months, it can cause dryness in the body. This is, kind of physical harm which we need to mention. So what is anticipated? And if you see, or if you remember on my slide, it was written potential. That doesn't mean it has to happen. It is an expected kind of harm. It is expected kind of benefit which you should mention. It is not necessarily that it has to happen, but it will facilitate the decision of ethics committee whether to give approval or whether to reject the proposal.
Okay, thank you very much, madam.
Yes, just like Yogita madam, I want to ask same question. If I want to do some type of study in COVID, while with the drugs, Visha Dravyas or Schedule E drugs,
I will give you a very simple example.
So, can I write proposal with these drugs?
I will tell you a very simple thing, a very simple example. Suppose you want to promote Ayush Kadha for prevention of COVID. Fine. Very propagated and very much propagated and well-known formulation which is there on Ayush Ministry's site. If you want to give it for prevention and you want to do it as a clinical study. Now again, we have to keep in mind one thing, that whatever people are doing outside, what medicines they are taking on OTC or as like from practitioners in a clinics, that is a different thing. But when you put it in a clinical study format, then you have to mention in harms that the contents of Ayush Kadha or of Ushna Vidya, making them it as a Ushna formulation. And in present season, that is in Grishma Rutu, it can cause heat in the body and can be whatever you say, can be a problematic thing for Pitta Prakriti individuals. You can write this as a harm. This is not like you are 100% saying that it will happen, but this is anticipated or this is a potential harm which you should mention in your assessment.
Yes, madam. And you have also told about suspending the trial. So that is also.
I will give you an example. Like we are doing right now a clinical study in healthy volunteers, And it was expected that the formulation on which we are working, it is a pharma study, it will improve the immunity of individuals. Okay. And it was a placebo control. It is still going on. It is because we have thought of terminating it, but we didn't. It is a placebo control study, and we observed that even in the study group, the participants, the healthy individuals who have taken this medicine, have suffered from COVID.
Oh.
So the whole
You are not audible, madam.
it happened. And in this study, it so happened that some individuals took vaccine because vaccine came in between. We couldn't stop the individuals from taking vaccine. So some individuals dropped out because they took vaccine. Some individuals dropped out because they became COVID positive. And then at the end, after recruiting 40 odd individuals, we had only 5-10 individuals remained in the study. So in this situation, withdrawing the study, completely terminating the study, because there was no point in continuing the study. But whatever patients had completed the study, we thought that at least let us analyze the data of those individuals, and that is how we are completing the study. But this is an example where you can terminate the whole study.
Yeah, but what is the role of eyes in such situation?
We have to inform. We cannot just because suppose I decide to terminate the study tomorrow, and there are few participants in the study still ongoing who are taking the medicines. What will happen to them if the study suddenly gets stopped? Who will monitor them? Who will take care of them? And that's why we have to inform ethics committee, and ethics committee will see to it that how many individuals are still ongoing, whether this is the appropriate time to stop the study, or an ethics committee will give a letter that okay, you can stop the study, but you complete the ongoing individuals. Some kind of suggestion will come from ethics committee considering the risk benefit assessment.
Okay, thank you, madam.
So Ila madam, should we stop here? If no
Yes.
questions, no further questions.
There are some earlier chats. See, have you answered that? Sarika Mane and some
I have considered all messages.
Amit Yadav. Yes, okay. So, any other queries or questions? Do you want to ask
I want to make a final comment that I always tell this, that when I did the PG diploma in bioethics, it changed my whole perspective towards life, and it changed my whole view to look the research work, research studies. So from the participants who are interested, please do this PG diploma in bioethics. It is a wonderful course, and it is now offered by many universities. Yenpoya University, Manipal University, IGNOU is offering, though initially it was only with the ICMR, now it is being offered by many universities. So those who are really interested in this subject should do this course, and it really is interesting and exciting course. And if you need any information, you can contact me anytime. But we should increase the number of like Ayurvedic statisticians should increase, Ayurvedic researchers should increase, Ayurvedic ethicists should also increase. So please do this course if possible for you.
Yes, definitely, madam. And your lectures are so promoting and promising that so many people are now taking interest in these research and review process and ethics. And the situation is now becoming very better. So hope next year or in this year also, next progressive sessions we will continue. And I think can I summarize all these all the session? Yes. So, thank you, Supriya Madam, for such a lecture and very informative lecture. And this lecture will be very helpful to our Ayurveda teachers, faculty, guides, MD students, PhD students also. This year, now we have arrived a new batch, first year MD batch. Now they are going to take their synopsis. They will do their synopsis, and our EC committee will review this. So your lecture will be very helpful for this process, and we are very thankful on the behalf of our principal and our department, the Dravyaguna department. Our HOD Lad Madam is on medical leave, but she is a very actively participated in this session, and I'm very thankful to her also. I'm very thankful to our principal madam for the permission for this lecture, and I'm very thankful to our vice principal Dr. Bobde sir and Yogini madam and Vaidya Tapasvi sir. He is our IT man, and our all the participants and faculty students for attending the lecture. So now I declare that this lecture and this session is now we will end this session. And again, thank you, Supriya Madam, and we will be continuing
We will meet soon for
to
another
train the
lecture
people.
on ethics.
Yes. For MD students,
Yes.
regarding ethics and how to write synopsis. So the date I will announce further with the permission of Supriya Madam. So here we will stop this session. Thank you, Madam. Dr. Lad Madam, do
Yes.
you want to say something?
आहे मी आणि थँक्यू सुप्रिया, व्हेरी नाईसली इलॅबोरेटेड. कारण इथिक्स हा विषय असा 1 तासात 2 तासात संपणारा नाहीये, पण तरी सुद्धा बराच कव्हर केलाय पोर्शन. आणि पीजीच्या दृष्टीने म्हणजे एमडीच्या दृष्टीने थोडा अजून एखादं लेक्चर वेगळं घेऊन त्यांना अजून थोडं सिम्प्लिफाय करून सांगावं असं मला वाटतंय सुप्रियानी. बाकी खूप छान. आता आम्ही लवकरच DHRचं रजिस्ट्रेशन करण्याचा प्रयत्न करू.
बोलूयात आणि त्याच्यावरती मॅडम डिटेल्स वरती.
नक्की बोलूया आपण.
टेक केअर आणि लवकर बऱ्या व्हा.
हो लवकर शक्ती येऊ दे.
येस.
थँक्यू.
ओके, बाय एव्हरीवन.
बाय, सी यू.
ओके, थँक्यू मॅडम.
थँक्यू.
सुप्रिया मॅडम नेहमीच खूप सिम्प्लिफाय करून सांगतात. म्हणजे त्यांचे लेक्चर्स म्हणूनच रिसर्च आणि स्टॅटिस्टिक्स सारखे खूप बोजड विषय इतक्या सिंपल करून सांगण्याची त्यांची हातोटी मला फारच आवडते खरंच. म्हणजे त्याच्यामुळे नक्कीच हे आपण चालू ठेवू सगळे प्रोसेस की सगळेच जण एज्युकेट होतील या बाबतीत अजून नक्की.
मॅडम,
ओके,
आता मॅडमने जो एक कोर्स आपल्याला सजेस्ट केला की तो करावा म्हणून, तर तो ऑनलाईन पण आहे का असं आपण त्यांना विचार.
हो, आहे ऑनलाईन पण आहे.
मॅडम ते डिटेल्स तुम्ही
त्यामध्ये ना बरेच डिप्लोमा आहेत, MSc कोर्सेस आहेत, डिग्री कोर्सेस आहेत, वेगवेगळे ऑप्शन्स आहेत. पण तुम्ही एथिक्स कोर्सेस इन इंडिया असं गुगल करून बघा, तुम्हाला मिळेल. आणि मला काही इन्फॉर्मेशन मिळाली तर मी इला मॅडमला पाठवेनच.
थँक्यू मॅडम.
मध्ये दीनानाथ मंगेशकर मध्ये हा बायो इथिक्सचा कोर्स झाला होता आणि बायो इथिक्स सोसायटी म्हणून फॉर्म केलेली आहे त्यांनी. त्यांचं आता सुरू आहे की नाही पुन्हा चौकशी करावी लागेल. मग आपण सगळ्यांसाठीच करता येईल आपल्याला.